Hi there. I want to spend 5 minutes today talking to you about what the difference is between inherent risk and risk assessments that are done under due diligence and how they fit together and how they could potentially help you. So first off, the importance of inherent risk. So inherent risk, the easiest way to think about this is the what. And what I mean by that is what product or service is needing to be fulfilled, right? So what are you going to market for? What are you outsourcing or getting a supplier to provide with? And that inherent risk is not necessarily anything about the supplier. It's about what you're asking them to do. So that could include things like, how critical is it? Is it a really critical function of your business? I.e., if it goes wrong, the business will fold effectively. So how important and critical is it to you as a business function? That could be the cost of change. So once you've invested in it, how difficult is it to get out of that arrangement, and how integrated is it in parts of your business, and how is it growing all those sort of tentacles and connection points and process engineering and cost of change will be required to get out of it once done. Because if significant, you really want to think about it before you get a supplier to help with that. The complexity kind of linked to cost of change and criticality. Is it really complex? Is it a well understood, well defined, well documented space, or is it really hard to make sense of and you need a specialist to do that? Deal type. What kind of deal is it going to be? Long-term, short-term, outsource, product, service? That might take consideration in terms of what you're asking to do. Sensitivity. Is the data sensitive for whatever reason? In terms of secret, private, confidential. You might want to consider the data points that are in that potentially a supplier might see. Privacy, very linked again to sensitivity. How does it work on a privacy scale in terms of the type of data archetypes that are at play? Data, how's the data being dealt with? Not so much as sensitivity and privacy, but is there much data flowing in and out of the organisation? Does it leave your organisation and your systems, etc.? Where is that being stored? What can be derived from it? The access that the supplier will need. With that access comes some risk in terms of could traverse to another part of the organisation, find something out. What level of access? That could be physical access as well. If you're a branch kind of organisation, your shops doesn't matter so much because Joe Public goes in the shops. Do they need access to your offices, or there might be more sensitive information? Do they need access to your data centres? That's even more risky, right? Need to sort of assess that access level. Is there a level of competency required? So the people that are providing the product and the service, is there a level of skill that's required around that? And thus competency you'd expect. Is it hard to train for that competency? And thus there's a lot of value put around that. So the people doing the service or the product or providing the product to you, what's their level of competency that needs to be considered? And then where are we on a political standpoint? Where is it being provided from in terms of geopolitical location? Is there any political connotations that's going to change or impact this? Is it on the agenda in terms of something that's a hot topic that might cause a necessary impact to your brand? And ultimately, do they have customer contact? Do they speak directly and interact directly with your customers and then can give some kind of perception to the brand? Or they are operating under your brand's umbrella, so thus, if anything goes wrong, potentially bring you reputational damage. There are a few things that you can consider in inherent risk in terms of putting them together and scoring them. We provide a framework where you can score each one out of a certain amount, and then you get a score at the end of it to work out what your inherent risk is of the thing that you're asking to do. How does that fit with due diligence? So when's the right time to apply due diligence? Well, you do typically the inherent risk before you go to market to look at what you're doing and inform how much rigor you need to put around what you're asking the market to tender for. But with due diligence, that's when you know the who. You've shortlisted the suppliers. So you want to do due diligence against a shortlisted number of suppliers, or you want to just do it against the supplier you're considering doing business with, in which case it's much organisational specific, and you consider things like what is their financial stability. Don't want to deal with someone if they're very financially unstable. They can't last the level of the term. So what does that look like? And there are various resources that you can go to and services that provide an outlook on that. It's all publicly accessible down at Companies House in the UK, for instance. What's their operational resilience like? How do they run their organisation? How resilient do they look in terms of being able to continue the operations associated and expected with business on a day-to-day basis and provide the service or product to you in a resilient fashion? How do they look in terms of anti-bribery and corruption? Have they got all the right suppliers' code of conduct in space? Have you got a supplier code of conduct? At which point this is the time to apply this and see how they score on that. What they like from a sustainability perspective, all the organisations in today's world should be considering their impact on the environment and how sustainable they are as a service. What are they using? What do you represent in terms of their contribution to carbon footprint, as an example, by the business you're going to give them? What's the brand assessment? How good is their brand? What's it like being associated with their brand? Is it a bad thing to be associated with their brand? Is it not conducive to the business in which you operate and the space in which you operate and the business you run. You need to see if those two brands working together is a good or bad thing, just at a brand marketing level. Any sanctions against the company? Are they operating in a sanctioned area, or they're a blacklist or anything in terms of where their head office is? That's a big one, especially for finance and financial services. InfoSec, how do they operate all their technology? What InfoSec framework do they use? How do they have all their policies and process hanging off that framework? Could you consider them safe? If you gave them data, would you consider it safe in their hands? And finally, do they appear on any watch list of any type? There's a lot of services you can get that can help you with that level of information. So when you add all that together, what does that give you? It kind of gives you a dual scaled model, sort of an X and Y axis, as you could see here. You can run it in slightly different ways. It's just I choose to put it like this for just the easy way of simplistically explaining it. So the vertical axis in this case is the inherent risk score that have come out all those type of questions that we went through earlier. The due diligence score, the questions and areas that we just went through. And ultimately, by scoring together what you're asking them to do with the specific around the person you're asking them to do it with, you get this view of either being top of this, which means it's a complex product or service that's business critical to you, or the top of this scale, which means the customer or the supplier in this case is high risk for whatever reason. So as with most of these models, you go to top right and you've got this kind of proceed with care, because it is really important to your organization as a product or service, and for whatever reason the person or the company you're looking to engage with is essentially high risk for whatever reason that may be. So we're kind of saying proceed with care. If you're going to proceed, you've got to put a significant level of governance around that and invest in how regularly you meet them and how tightly you manage them and control them. Versus this one here on the top left, which is complex products and service, but the company is done very well on due diligence. There's a very low score out on due diligence. So medium frequency, but significant governance because it's so important to you. All the way to bottom right, which is high risk again, high risk supplier, high risk customer, recommends medium governance and a lower frequency. Given the complexity of this, and it's not very complex, there's likely a lot of players in here. So if you get a high risk or customer supplier in this space, especially a supplier, you might want to consider going with someone else that's lower risk until you can get it back to here. And this low inherent risk, low concern about the organisation you're about to do business with, so that's fine. You can, in addition to this as another use case, use this quite effectively to inform your segmentation models. So as you can see here, top right's critical, top left important, bottom right transactional, and bottom left tail. It doesn't always line up accordingly and doesn't line up entirely, but that is something that can be reused in that regard to help you with segmentation out of this process of scoring inherent risk and due diligence. And by putting that all together, you end up with this kind of view, which is, in summary, if you provide or conduct inherent risk assessments when you look at the what product or service need is being fulfilled, before you go out to market, you'll have a score. Then once you find someone that you want to interact with on this basis, then you have this ability to look at the who and do some due diligence against that. When you combine these scores, it gives you a very good way of segmenting your supply landscape down into manageable buckets, where the higher they score, the more you have to do with them and the more care and attention you need to give them. I hope that was useful. Look out again for any more thought pieces from us. Please provide your feedback and comments. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. All the details will be in the narrative below this video. Thank you. Bye-bye.